In my last video about Pileus shapes, we ended off with the shaggy mane mushroom. Here are two photos of the same mushroom. Besides for the one on the left disintegrating into ink, what's different about them? Look closer at the rim of the cap. This is called the margin. You've already learned the cap shape, but in this video, we'll be adding two more details we can use to identify mushrooms: the shape and its features. Let's begin with the shape. For this detail, we're interested in the direction that the edge of the cap is pointing. Overall, there are only 5 different margin shapes we need to worry about. When the margin points downward away from the stipe, then it is called straight or plane. But what if the edge of the cap points upward? Just like a rebellious teenager, the margin of a mushroom also turns up. When you see this, the margin is said to be uplifted or upturned. Speaking of rebels, what makes a person look rebellious? Some will say it's the eyes, but if you ask me, the secret is always in the stash. Here we have the infamous Guy Fawkes. You may recognize this stylized masked version of him, who in the UK is decelebrated for plotting to bomb the House of Lords in London in 1605. And here we have Bhagat Singh, India's best known revolutionary, who was executed in 1931 after exploding harmless bombs to protest the British rule. Take a look at their lip hair. Something about the handlebar mustache just speaks revolution. Well, get this. The margin of the pileus can curl upward too, just like a handlebar mustache. The name? Revolute. While it's possible for the margin to curl upward, it's also possible for it to curve downward. When you see a margin like this, just be sure to call it incurved, since it's curving inward and pointing towards the stipe. The fact is, many mushrooms have an incurved margin when they are immature, but it's not impossible for the margin to remain incurved upon reaching maturity, as with the Cornarius hurinensis. Okay, I want you to give this last one a whirl. 400 million years ago, there were these creatures in the sea called ammonoids. We know they existed because of their shells. Now, these things can get pretty big. Starting with the center of the spiral, each time you complete a circle is called a whorl, and there are several different kinds of spirals. But the one we're interested in is the involute spiral. This is when the larger outer whorls cover the whorls before them, giving it that kaleidoscopic appearance. Mushroom margins curl inward too. The name for a margin that curls up underneath the gills is called involute, which you can see here with the Lactarius deceptivus and Paxillus involutus. Okay, we've covered margin shapes, but what about margin features? As usual, I always like to start things off simple. First up, we have the smooth margin. Nothing tricky happening along the edge. Easy, right? Keep your guard up, because this next one might steal your soul. If the mushroom looks like it's wearing tattered and raggedy robes, then it is called appendiculate. This hanging tissue comes from its partial veil, whose role is to isolate and protect the developing spore-producing surface underneath the cap. The word itself comes from the Latin word appendere, meaning to hang. Speaking of spirits, what about the ones you find near bodies of water? Mermaids, nereids, limnads, and naiads all belong to this family called undines. And these creatures resemble humans in nearly every way. But what separates us from them? The answer? A human soul. These watery beings are creepy, to say the least. But the word undine is important in our discussion because, you guessed it, it comes from the Latin root unda, which means wave or sea. If the mushroom cap's margin appears wavy, then you can call it undulate. You can also say it just has a wavy margin, but you gotta admit, undulate sounds pretty sweet. While we're still under the sea, why not stop at a restaurant and order some seafood? I'd recommend the scallops. If you look closely at the edge of a scallop shell, you can see a pattern of evenly rounded hills. If we see a margin that looks like this, call it scalloped. Of course, there's always another older word you might see people use, and that word is crenate. But personally, I just go with scalloped. If you haven't clicked off the video yet, then good. I want you to get this straight, like the Bering Strait. Surprisingly, if you switch the I and the A, the meaning won't change much. Let's just add on the letters I-O-N to make the word striation. According to its 1849 definition, a striation is a parallel streak. You might notice these short radial lines going around along the edge. These are called striate margins. Still with me? Don't fold just yet. If the margin looks like it's folded along the edge, kind of like a paper fan, then the term is plicate. The best example by far is Leucocoprinus birnbaumi, which, if you were the size of an ant, this mushroom would probably make a great umbrella. The rain can be refreshing on a dry summer day, but too much of it can be disastrous, environmentally speaking. Here in Death Valley National Park, lying in California's vast Mojave Desert, take a look at the ground. You won't find any mushrooms here, but these mud cracks remind me of another kind of margin, rhymos. This word can also be used for the surface too, but when it refers to the margin, we're talking about varying uneven cracks or fissures along the edge, missing from the cap itself. It's almost like someone took some scissors and tore out pieces of the cap. Speaking of dry places and dry jokes, check out these layers in the Grand Canyon. Many polypore mushrooms grow outwardly in concentric layers like these, such as the red-belted conch. If the margins appear to be separated into differently colored or textured zones, then they can be described as zonate. But how are we able to see these layers of sediment in the Grand Canyon? Well, you can thank erosion. See, over time, water detaches and removes soil material, wearing away the Earth's surface. That soil gets distributed to other places downstream. For us humans, this is often seen as a bad thing. But some mushrooms erode themselves in order to sustain their species. Here's the shaggy man again, which I showed you at the start of this video. Now, take a look at the one on the left. The name for this margin is eroded. But why would a mushroom literally erode and liquefy itself? If we had a microscope, we'd see that its ink contains spores. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why ink? You see, by disintegrating its gills from the bottom up, the cap peels away, and the maturing spores are always kept in the best position for catching wind currents. The thing is, mushrooms just want to survive. Just like us. Thank you.